Do you think it's possible that unemployment will be in double digits in November?
Yes, I do. But I think that all the signs of economic recovery are going to be raging everywhere. Robert Barro has said that he thinks that it looks a little bit like at the end of World War II, the countries that didn't have their capital stocks destroyed by the war, that when the war ended, they pretty much got their economies going at a rate of 40 or 50% a year. And while, he was cautioned about the analogy, and it was just in a private email, I think that Professor Barro's view that we don't have, our capital stock hasn't been destroyed, our human capital stock is ready to get back to work, and so that there are lots of reasons to believe that we can get going way faster.
That was White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett referring to human beings as human capital stock during an interview with CNN. He is encouraging states to reopen, for employees to get back to work, despite the fact that several states in the U.S. are still experiencing significant spikes in the number of coronavirus cases. So he's getting a little bit of backlash for this. But Cenk, as you know, the Trump administration is certainly guilty of basically pumping out all sorts of controversial stories in the news cycle. So I'm sure people will forget about this. But Hassett has no intention of urging the government to do what's right, which is offer actual financial relief to ordinary Americans. Reverend William Barber tweeted, "Before 1865, American insurance companies sold policies to protect human capital stock. But the 13th Amendment abolished the practice of owning human beings. Some folks need to be reminded." And I think that you're right. That's a powerful statement, Cenk. But I think a lot of Americans today, American workers, feel like they have been treated as nothing more than human capital stock.
Look, one way of looking at the story is the guy says something that's a little off color or not exactly right. Not a big deal in the big scheme of things, given all the corruption and the illegality of the Trump administration and their disregard for the law. We can go on and on, right? But I actually think it's telling because it's their mindset. It's not a gaffe. It's not a slip up. And it doesn't matter that he meant to deride workers or didn't mean to deride workers by calling them human capital stock. It's literally how they think. They think, okay, well, that is one of my assets. I have these workers here who are my human capital stock. But if you treat people like furniture, then okay, well, I'm going to take, some write-offs here because the furniture got banged up a little bit or 3 pieces of the furniture broke. But hey, look, it's part of my costs. It doesn't really matter. I factor that in. But this is not furniture. It's not cattle. It's human beings. And they genuinely don't view them that way. That is why American citizens are the very last priority in these stimulus bills. Because we're looking at it as, wait, don't you want to help the citizens? Don't you want to help the humans? And they're viewing it as, no, actually, among my different capital that I have, the humans are the most replaceable and hence the least valuable. That's why we got to them last or not at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And for anyone who's been paying attention to the White House and some of the messaging coming from people like Kevin Hassett, it's not surprising that they do not prioritize any type of financial relief for ordinary Americans. In fact, an interview that didn't get much attention featured Kevin Hassett on May 10th, basically saying like, I don't know if we can expect much relief for Americans moving forward. Hassett actually said that the White House could potentially move on to other things that the president has mentioned, like a payroll tax cut and potentially even a capital gains holiday. But here's the statement that he gave reporters back on May 10th.
Mike DeWine, an Ohio Republican, told me that his state really needs more money for the state and for local governments. He's already cut education by almost 4%, which he called a big hit. This is for dire needs like education. Can he count on the Trump administration to get him the money that Ohio needs? Can the other governors count on it?
Right. Well, where we are right now in the White House is that we've got a bunch of economies around the country and really, frankly, around the world starting to turn the lights back on. We're watching what happens both to economic activity and, frankly, to the path of the disease as that happens. And so that we expect that very quickly we'll have a picture about, how quickly we can recover, whether we might have to slow the recovery back down because the disease is spreading and so on. And I think that it's just premature, given that the $9 trillion of aid that passed in the last 3 phases, given that that is still out there and there's still a bunch of it that's going to be delivered over the next month, we think that we have a little moment, the luxury of a moment to learn about what's going on so that the next step that we take can be prudent.
So we have learned what's going on. 30 million Americans are unemployed. They have received a one-time check for $1,200. And there are better unemployment benefits under the stimulus plans that have been already passed by Congress and signed by the president. But keep in mind that in some states where the unemployment system is underfunded, most people who have applied for unemployment have not gotten it yet. So this is a dire situation. State governments are under a lot of pressure and stress. And without any type of relief from the federal government, local economies need to basically cut spending on programs that people desperately need.
So, look, people are rightfully mad at the Democrats. They play along with these Republican games often, et cetera. But it's every once in a while the Republicans remind you of how over-the-top callous they are and how Democrats are amateurs compared to them in how much they're willing to serve corporate interests. So it should be stunning that he thinks, well, no, we're not going to help regular people anymore. They're just human capital stock, and we feel like we're okay on that stock. On the other hand, we're ready to do a holiday for corporations and their taxes. So it's while we're suffering and everything is melting down and you got 38 million Americans unemployed, he says, I don't give a damn about you, but the poor corporate taxes need a holiday. They need a holiday. So it's unreal. They don't need a holiday at all. They need to be increased, not decreased. He talked about in that last clip, $9 trillion. That's right. The great overwhelming percentage of that $9 trillion went to the top corporations in the world. Why on God's green earth would they need tax breaks after that? Well, you tell your human capital stock that they could go shove it. This is what Republicans think of the average American. They despise you. They view you as a pawn to move around on a chessboard. The only people they serve is multinational corporations. If you don't know that, you're absolutely ignorant.
Now, Mick Mulvaney, who used to be Trump's director in the Office of Management and Budget, also had an interview with CNBC recently. And in it, he argued that we're conditioning Americans to, get too much help from the federal government. That's his take. Here he is elaborating on that.
Risks here in the stimulus package is that people have lost sort of perspective on what government costs. We're at risk of training people to believe that government is free, that we can borrow whatever we want to with no consequences whatsoever. That is extraordinarily dangerous. I think everybody on this show would agree with that. We have to sort of break that cycle to say, look, there's costs associated with what we're doing. And when you spend $2 or $3 or $8 trillion, there's going to be a cost to that at some point. It's not free. I disagree with you, say that we're not giving them what they want. I think the contrary is true. We're giving people a lot of stuff they don't want. And the government is too big in the wrong places.
And Cenk, I want to just take you back to some of the excellent reporting by Zach Carter over at the Huffington Post. Now, he published this piece prior to Congress passing the second round of stimulus relief, which included some of the benefits for ordinary Americans, like a more robust unemployment program. But he wrote this because it gives you a sense of how much help massive corporations received just from the Federal Reserve. Okay, not even through Congress. So with the Federal Reserve's announcement that it would be providing unprecedented direct support to large corporations, the central bank ensured that firms can get access to government-backed loans with no strings attached. So Mulvaney's talking about ordinary Americans and like they need to understand the importance of like the consequences associated with taking on too much debt. The Federal Reserve is like willy-nilly handing out loans, government-backed loans to these massive corporations. Let me give you more. Republican leaders are demanding $500 billion, by the way, this passed, as we all know eventually, $500 billion to distribute as Mnuchin sees fit, with no disclosure for 6 months, no curbs on executive compensation, no limits on shareholder giveaways, no requirements to retain workers, and no meaningful oversight mechanisms. The public would receive no share in the upside to its investment. If companies on public support go bust, we eat the losses. If they prosper, we don't even get an investment or interest payment. And Zach Carter is probably the best reporter when it comes to the economic handling related to coronavirus. And he's absolutely right. Not only did Congress give these massive bailouts to corporations, on top of that, you have the Federal Reserve, bailing out these banks themselves with these ridiculous loans. No strings attached.
Mick Mulvaney was also Donald Trump's chief of staff until recently, of course. And so here he is talking about, you don't want to give the people the wrong kind of training. And then, this Republican ideology that if you actually help any regular citizen, they'll be trained in the wrong way, presumably like dogs, and that we'll get used to our treats. And we should never let the dogs get used to their treats. Instead, we should give away the lion's share of $9 trillion to our corporate friends. Well, how about training them, Mick? You're training them that every time they collapse, every time they fail, every time they take too much risk, come back and they're bought bitches like you in the Republican Party in the United States government. We'll bail them out. We'll give them trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars. How about that training, Mick? You love that training because you're bought and owned by those corporations. So they took all of our hard-earned taxpayer money. They gave it to their corporate friends. And now when it comes to saying, hey, with our money, can you also help us a little bit? They're like, no, then we would be training you wrong. These people are disgusting.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.